This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we got a special guest on the podcast today. Her name is Julie Proctor. So she is one of the founders of Manos De Fe. I believe I said that right. My Spanish isn't fantastic, but I just want to read something specifically from their website to give you an idea of what they do. The mission of Manos De Fe is to share the love of Christ while helping impoverished families in Chiriqui, Panama, achieve self-sufficiency and hope for a brighter future. Manos De Fe empowers hundreds of people to live healthier, productive, and more faith-filled lives through various programs, including family outreach, education, and orphan transition. We also work to build sustainability and provide job training through our adjacent farm, vocational training, and educational opportunities. And so I became aware of Julie and Gary, her husband, because Joby Martin of Church of 1122, obviously, guys, you know him here in this audience. He said, hey, you've got to talk to these people. And I'm like, okay, cool. Why? Right? Because just because a friend says, hey, you should talk to these people, it's not an automatic yes. I mean, I get 20, 25 pitches for people to come on the show for every one that I end up bringing on. And he's just like, look, these are people. You want to talk about pushing back darkness? These are people that are pushing back darkness on the front lines every single day. And so I was like, all right, sold. And so I started digging into kind of what they did. But it was interesting, the beginning part of this conversation, first 20 minutes or so, I'm just talking to Julie about what it was like being there from the very beginning, because she was at Beach Church, which is the church that, planted and launched Church of 1122. She was at Beach Church before Joby was, right? And so then Joby comes in as a youth pastor, and then he's, doing his own service, and then that becomes, 1122, the church. And so she was there from before the beginning and then at the beginning. And now her husband, Gary, is a elder there at Church of 1122. And so we got to talk about that process, like how did he become an elder? What was it like kind of seeing the transition of the church from this fledgling thing basically to this thing that's like a rocket ship and, is saturated kind of this thing is this normal? And I just really, really enjoyed kind of a behind the scenes look on all the 1122 stuff. But then we transitioned into stuff that they're doing in Panama. And I mean, it's kind of rough, guys. I mean, they're getting these girls who have been trafficked for a large chunk of their life and getting them out and trying to get them back on their feet. A lot of these women have children because of the trafficking situation. There's not a lot of godly role models, especially male godly role models that are there in this environment. But we really dig into, okay, what are y'all doing on the ground? Because again, I talk about this in the show. I'm not naturally that compassionate, and I just, there's impoverished people all over the planet, right? And so why should we care about impoverished people in Panama more than the ones in Bangladesh or in, Sudan or in, some parts of America or different things like that? And so I really enjoyed her being able to talk about that. And then I just got her to kind of explain, what are some of the worst parts about what y'all are doing? Because it's not just, the giving websites and the videos you send and all that. There's the real tangible work of, okay, you had this calling that you felt like God was pointing you in a particular direction to a particular country, to a particular people group in that area. So now what? What does it mean to actually do that work, and what does it mean to do that on a day in and day out basis? So the thing with Julie is, you're not going to be in this conversation, you're not going to be overwhelmed by her personality, because she's just one of those, she's like the opposite of me. She's very calming, but she is a frontline warrior. And so there's the idea that you get in your mind of what a frontline warrior looks like or should look like or should act like. And she's not going to, check a lot of those boxes, but she's actually doing the dang thing. There are guys that like to posture on social media, and there are guys that like to, peacock when they're in public. And then there are people that just get after it. Her and her husband, Gary, they're just get after it people. So they put their yes down. They said, yes, Lord, now what? And so, there's a lot that we can learn from people like Julie Proctor. And so I'm just thrilled that we had this conversation today. It went better than I, could have even expected. So I'm not going to keep her from you guys any longer. So without further ado, let's get into it. Julie Proctor, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate a seat at your table.
Well, hey, I got to tell you, I was a little surprised. Well, I'm always a little bit surprised whenever I have a lady listener say, hey, I actually listened to your show. But then it also makes me a little nervous because, I never think of the lady listeners when I'm creating the content. But I love that we do have lady listeners. So when he told me off air that you listen to the show, I was like, oi, what did I say? So what is it? Oh, why in the world would you listen to me? I'm a lunatic.
I love listening to the male perspective. I raise boys. I work with young girls who have issues with boys. So I just like to hear the man's side of it and to see kind of how they come across, how they interpret the scriptures, and then how they apply it to them lives, and it makes it easier for me to teach it to people in my life. So I enjoy.
Okay. Yeah, excellent. My wife, we have nothing but boys. Even our dogs have been boys, and so she's just like, I am just surrounded by all this testosterone. I remember I got a blood test years ago, and if you go to one of those testosterone clinics, it doesn't matter what your testosterone's at. They're going to say you need to be on testosterone of some kind. And she heard the doctor say that I needed to be on testosterone, and she just looked at me like, there's no way. There's simply no way that we can have even a little bit more of testosterone in your house. So guys, pray for my wife, pray for everybody that has to deal with that level of crazy. But the way that you and I got connected is because you and your husband Gary are big time Church of 1122ers. And so I've got to be careful with the language. You go to church with Joby, you don't go to Joby's church. We got to be very specific about that. But tell me how that all got going. How did y'all get involved with 1122?
We are some of the old timers. We were from the original church that Joby was the youth pastor at, which is Beach Church.
Yeah.
So once, we launched, we were part of the launch and have been going to Church 1122 since it first started. And now we've grown into my husband becoming one of the elders at Church of 1122. So he is always working with Pastor Joby and with the rest of the elders and keeping our church in line and on track.
Okay, well, Julie, I got lots of questions there because Joby's like impossible to keep on track. That's why he has like 17 assistants.
Yeah.
But let's go back to Beach Church, because I've been to Jacksonville several times doing stuff with Joby there, and so I've driven by Beach Church, and obviously Joby has a lot of great things to say about Beach Church and about the pastor there and things like that. But let's go back to that time to where you've got this church service that was starting at 1122, and the service kind of overgrew, if you will. And then, it's like, hey, we're going to plant, but we're not going to plant like in some faraway land. We're going to plant a few miles, inland from the beach or whatever. And so just take us through those early days, because of course, when you talk to Joby about it, Joby just says, hey, I thought I was going to be a youth minister for forever. I was going to be the youth minister guy. I never wanted to launch a church. I definitely didn't want a multi-site church with hundreds of employees and, all this. Like, I didn't know, like that was never in the plans. So take us to those fledgling stages where we don't know that this is going to turn into a thing. We just know we're moving to a new building.
Yes. Well, interestingly enough, when it was first started, Joby was preaching to a population that they found was the most unchurched population group, a young adult group. So when you do your stats, the group of people that you just don't see coming back to church, you go when you're younger and then you go when you're older, but what about that 20s crowd? So they had Pastor Joby, who's really great with the youth, start preaching the service, and the service just grew exponentially, where it was standing room only, elbowing in, and was becoming a church in and of itself. And just people would say, I'm going to 1122, and that's the time, that his church service started, and it kind of morphed into its own being. And Joby, as you know, just has such a way of preaching the gospel and teaching it in a way that you can apply it, and you are excited to actually explain the sermon to someone else who wasn't able to go that Sunday, or to your colleagues at work. And it just, as he launched into his own church, or our church, we can't say his church, but our church.
Yeah, careful.
I know, I do we all do that. But it was really cool to watch it grow, because I saw it I was there before Joby even came, to seeing Joby come, to seeing Joby just get this following of people that just were, thirsty and hungry for the word. Like they just wanted to hear it in a way that applied to their lives. And sometimes some pastors can't, they just have a hard time, doing that with that generation and that crowd. And it worked.
Well, you talked about, Julie, thirsty and hungry for the word. But if you were to get a book, and there have been books written out there about this is how you grow an enormous church and become a super rich mega pastor. Like here's basically what you do. You don't do that by going verse by verse through books of the Bible. Like you don't do that through expository preaching. You do that by telling people affirmations that they should tell themselves in the mirror. Like they are good enough. God is for you. So do whatever the heck you want, because, God's going to bless you no matter what. Oh, also, by the way, if you donate to this ministry, it's going to come back to you tenfold and all that kind of stuff. And so we're starting to get out into, the crazy towns of different theological stuff. But I don't really buy the aw shucks approach of Joby Martin. I know he's listening to this right now, but this all like, oh, I'm just a country boy from Dillon, South Carolina. I don't really know. I just kind of preach about. No. The dude might be a genius, right? And I don't really want to give him any more compliments beyond that because, he's already got a big ego. But it's like, I don't really buy the, my pockets are out, I got my hat in my hand, and I just don't really know. I think he knows that there's power in the word, and regardless of what the pressures from outside culture and from kind of the self-help zeitgeist is doing, he's just going to go back to the word of God. And so I guess you tell me, because I only became aware of him in 2022 or something like that. And I went back to 2016 and listened to his sermons, and I was like, oh, okay, he's kind of been the same way. But has he kind of had the same style, Julie, of no matter what story I tell, or no matter what, anecdote I'm trying to give to somebody, we've got to go back to the word, and we've just got to go verse by verse?
From day one, he has always had that style, and he will not falter from the truth. He will not deviate from the word, but he does it with comedy, and he does it with application, and he does it in a way that it makes sense. Because a lot of times you listen to pastors and you can't figure out how it can apply to your particular life and your situation, and he does, and he preaches the same thing. He'll tell you over and over, it's the same message, just presented in a different way. But it's always amazing, and it's always unique to me, and then it'll be unique to the next person and the other person, and he just has a way with that. He's definitely a skilled speaker, a skilled teacher, a skilled preacher.
One thing, Julie, because you've listened to my show for a little while, so perhaps I've used this statement, perhaps I haven't. Maybe you haven't heard me say this, but we have the #1 show in the Christian men's space, whatever that is, and so we've grown considerably since we launched in 2017. And for years, Julie, I would be asked by random laymen or even pastors in churches like, hey, can you help us build a men's ministry, a vibrant men's ministry? And then what they meant is, can you help us get guys to show up not just on Sunday mornings and not just on Wednesday nights, but on some random Saturday morning at 5:30 in the morning to basically sit around in a circle and do Bible study and talk about our feelings or something like that. And what I've kind of changed, Julie, is over the years, I've gone from, I don't really care about men's ministry because that's essentially just programming. It's, hey, come to this event. It's, hey, show up to this room. And I want to focus on making churches man-friendly, where if a manly dude, whatever that means, so in the eye of the beholder, whatever a manly dude is, that he walks into a church and doesn't automatically feel like, oh, I'm out of place here, or, oh, I have to check my, genitalia at the door. Yeah. But hey, my virile, testosterone-filled nature is not going to be stymied here. It's going to be elevated, and it's going to be pointed in a biblically based, gospel-centered, help serve your neighbor type of way. It seems like Joby has modeled that and has accidentally created one of the most man-friendly churches that we have in this country. But also, I know it's taken me a while to set this up, but for a lot of women, Julie, when there's a lot of testosterone-filled, strong, virile man in an environment, perhaps they've been harmed by someone that's been like that, that's been very, very, a dominant and something like that. And so this feminization of our culture will look at an environment like that and be like, oh, that's oppressive, that's authoritarian, we can't have that, it's disordered somehow, we need y'all to chill out, we need to tamp this down a little bit. But it doesn't seem to be what we get from the Church of 1122. But if you were to look through the employees, there's not a men's ministry pastor. Y'all don't do men's ministry events. I mean, we're doing a men's conference at the end of this year, but it's not an explicit, here's our men's ministry, but the church seems very, very man-friendly. I know that was somewhat a convoluted setup, but I'd love to see or hear your perspective on that.
Yes, it's definitely for the man. If you walk in, all the beards, all the tattoos, all the deer heads, it's definitely, got the testosterone flow. But he also preaches every sermon that Joby will preach about act like men. There's always a part of it of how that in and of itself, when you're acting like a man, would be honoring and loving to a woman. So the woman's elevated every time the man is elevated in his sermon. So I think he gets so biblical with it that it's understandable. And I don't think women get offended by it, because I think women actually appreciate how their life would be changed if a man lives his life in the godly way that is preached.
Well, I think you're hitting on something that the, 5% of lady listeners we have to the show, the messages, or whenever I see them in person or something like that, that's what they tell me. Is they're like, we want men to do this. And Joby gave me one of the most incredible experiences, which just seemed like a small thing, but it was a big thing to me. There's a gal at the church who I think that you would know. She attends there. Apparently, she's a single mother. I think her son's like 7 or 8 years old. Apparently, the dad is a horrifically terrible person. And she is struggling to get this young man, around good male role models because dad's such a jerk, right? But one thing that she does is every time we do an Ask a Pastor episode on our show, or the forging table where it's me and 3 other guys sitting around, doing Bible study like men would do, making mistakes, chopping each other down, making fun of each other, like just having a good time, right? She makes sure that she exposes her son to that. And then when I was there for, I can't remember if it was Saturated or Encounter or something like that, he made sure that I got to meet that mom, that single mom, and that young boy, just to kind of further like, hey, I'm like a real dude. I know you listen to me through your phone, but I'm like a real dude. And I got to get down on that guy's level, that little guy, and just talk about his Spider-Man shirt. Oh, that's so awesome. And I'm so glad you get to listen to me and keep doing that. But I think Joby and the church has set up a lot of those opportunities for women who maybe are like, they're victims of their circumstances and or their own decision making. And here they are just trying to make the best of it. But I think that's one of the ways that's real men's ministry, if you will. Like it's not just, hey, read Wild at Heart, even though you should. It's not just, hey, go to this men's conference, even though, buy your tickets and you should, October 17th and 18th in Jacksonville, Florida. But at the same time, like that's when the real ministry starts happening. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's all to teach you how to do the ministry. The ministry, the walk is being the father figure to all the boys at the church, or all the children at the church. So what good is it to go to men's ministry and to do, all the men things that you're doing if you're not applying them to your life? So there's definitely application.
Hey guys, real quick. Do you remember during the pandemic when you basically couldn't get anything shipped to your house? All this manufacturing that was supposed to be taking place in America had been shipped overseas and you just didn't notice it. And I remember a bunch of companies saying, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we bring manufacturing back to America, and almost none of them followed through on that promise. But for me and for all of us here at Undaunted.Life, I wanted to make sure that I partnered with an American company that actually did want to prioritize American workers, their families, their communities, and a company that would keep their word. And that's why I want to remind you that we are partnered with Origin. Origin is an apparel company based in Maine, and what do they make? They make the best jiu-jitsu gis on the planet and the only jiu-jitsu gis that are made completely in America. They also make jeans. Yes, they have stretchy jeans. They also have work jeans and bootcut jeans for you guys as well. They make amazing hunting gear. And here's the thing. I know you guys like some other hunting brands, but those companies are American companies that use overseas labor to increase their profit margins on their gear, not to help you or Americans out. They also offer handmade leather boots. That does include steel toe boots and mock toe boots. And they also make workout clothes and everyday pants and shirts and almost indestructible hoodies. And they're launching new apparel all the time. Guys, if you haven't already tried Origin stuff, you need to check them out and support a company that supports Americans. Try Origin out today by going to www.originusa.com. That's originusa.com. Use the promo code UNDAUNTED to get 10% off your order. Again, that's originusa.com. Promo code UNDAUNTED to get 10% off your order. Okay, and so let's talk a little bit about Gary as well. So he's not here to speak for himself, so let's talk about him behind your back.
Absolutely.
But he's your wonderful and lovely husband.
He is.
So he is an elder at the Church of 1122, and that's another thing that's weird. Typically, when you have these enormous churches with these kind of like pastors that have their own gravitational pull, they tend to try to insulate themselves a little bit. So they don't have elders. They have a board of directors that they happen to also be the chairman of. And so basically, there's no way that they can be kicked out of their own church. There's a lot of prominent pastors that I can name right now that's how they've set themselves up, because it's a business and they don't want to be able to be kicked out of their own business. It's like, that's one of the reasons why Undaunted.Life is not a 501c3, because I've heard of several men that have been kicked out of their own 501c3 because one disgruntled person on the board got a few other people on board and all of a sudden they got kicked out of their own thing that they started, right? And so, but Joby's got elders. and he is submitted to the leadership of the elders from the beginning. He talks about a conversation he had with his wife, Gretchen, at the beginning, like, should we even do this? This is crazy. And Gretchen was like, do you think these elders would let you do this if they didn't feel like God was leading you in this direction? Like, let's let them be elders. But how did Gary get picked or selected or basically identified as a man that could be an elder in Church 1122 and help really guide the Leviathan that church has become?
Wow, that's a good question. My husband has, from the time we've gotten married to present day, he's always, had a love for the Lord, and he is such a scholar, and he thrives on learning the Bible. And I don't even know all the books he's read, like many. He's got a whole library of books, but he wants to learn it, but he wants to totally understand it. So I tease him that he's like an encyclopedia of the Bible. Like he just loves, He loves all of that. And he lives his life that way too. And he's very humble. Like you couldn't meet a more humble person. Like he's the most humble, and he's just lived a life where he would do these great things. Because I'm his wife, I could say he does the great things.
Yeah, that's right.
And he does. He's a great man that does great things, but he always sits in the back. He's always the last one to enter, holding the door for everyone to leave, kind of stands back in the shadows. And I think, eventually, with doing Bible studies with them and people coming into his life and learning how he can pour so much out into other people. And he's just such a wealth of knowledge and inspiration too, and encouragement to others, that he was recommended by a few guys, I think. And then there's a whole vetting process and a whole onboarding of the elders, which is, years. This isn't something they take lightly. It's something that, because, like you said, this is something that, Joey doesn't just stack the deck with people who he knows is going to keep him in charge. He wants people who are biblically sound and, fit the biblical principles too of being an elder. And so it's a big thing, and it's a big honor. And I'm super proud of Gary for doing that.
One other thing, if we could dig in a little bit, give us a peek behind the curtain of what that vetting process was like, because I think I've heard Joby talk about it before, but it's like a 2-year process from the time of basically nomination, I guess you could call it. I don't know if it's that formal, but you're nominated, you're basically pegged, but then it's like 2 years of stuff that you have to do in vetting before you're actually officially an elder. And then I don't know how long the terms are, if there are terms or whatever, but can you give us like, okay, what was it 2 years? Like what was going on during that time? Was he having to like submit, blood samples and like do crazy, weird things in the woods? Like what was he having to do?
Daily testosterone levels? No, I'm teasing that.
That's right. Got to stay above a certain level, guys.
I do remember him. He had a whole basket that sat by his recliner full of books that they were reading, that they had this, standard reading that they would get together and discuss. And I don't even remember which ones they were. I think he was writing something at one point. I know he had meetings. I know he had interviews, and it was a 2-year entire process of learning and, making sure that his biblical principles and are in line with the churches.
I mean, just hearing that is so encouraging, because I've been reached out to guys, and there are guys probably listening to this where they're young guys that are elders of their churches, right? And, Joby talks about, it's like, how can you be an elder of a church when you've never like elded anything? And it's like, gray hair doesn't mean that you have wisdom, but it's a pretty good indicator, right? Because like me right now, if my church asked me to be an elder, I'd be like, no. Like I'm 38 years old. Like my family is young. Like there's still a lot of things that I feel like I need to be sanctified in. And some parts of my life have been a fairly slow sanctification process because I'm a knucklehead. And other parts, it's just like, hey, I'm just not been prepared for that. And so I like that whole idea. I want to kind of wrap up the discussion of Church 1122 so we can get into some of your mission work. But I did want to ask you about this, because I don't feel like I really got to experience 1122 until Saturated last year. And guys, this sounds like it's like a commercial for 1122. It's not. I'm just like, I like talking to somebody that's like been there from the beginning. This is really, really interesting to me. So hopefully it's interesting to you guys listening to this, and that you're not too bored, Julie.
No.
But when I was at Saturated, so here we go. I'm there, and I'm there to work, right? So we've got Jim Bergen, Matt Chandler, Derwin Gray, Ben Stewart, and after they preach, they go into a room with me and Joby and Pastor Vinky, and we record a podcast. And then, I was there, and I was there to work, but I had been there a few times, and, I had seen, the services and seen Joby preach live and all that. But when Jim Bergen preached that first night, and when I experienced the worship, and I've always kind of been weird with worship, and I've talked about that a lot on the show, then Joby gets back up on stage after just to basically close out and tell everyone to go home. And he's like holding his chest because he can barely breathe. And you can hear him even say under his breath, he's like, gosh, I can barely breathe up here. Like he was so overwhelmed. It was weird, Julie, the feeling in the room, and not just like, oh, it was, emotive because the music was emotional and because the sermon was good. It was like there was a heft of the Holy Spirit. I felt like I could just grasp a handful of the Holy Spirit because it was just hanging in the air. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And then it just kept going, right? Every single night. And it's just like, it was overwhelming. And when you see guys like Jim and Matt and Derwin and Ben that are all from big churches, that all have, sold books and done the big conferences, and to hear them all at dinner afterwards be like, Joby, what's going on here? Like, what is in the water in Jacksonville? What's happening inside of this congregation? This feels different. And every single one of them said that. But from your perspective, Julie, was it just like, yeah, this is just church? Like, this is just whatever? Because from an outsider that comes from a very kind of reserved, very chill, very like no high, no low emotion, like straight down the middle church, it just didn't feel the same. I'm just wondering what it felt like from your perspective, being, one of the OGs of the entire church.
Wow. I love that. That's the sensation that you felt. That's amazing. It is every Sunday that you can feel the Holy Spirit comes in, and the worship is real, and the people are real. And that's what Joby tries to say, on stage, is that we are a real church with real problems, and we need a real Jesus, a real man to die on the cross for our sins. And he just brings it to a level where it, like I've said it 100 times already, but it's just so it's so me, it's so you, it's so you can apply it to your life. However, when it comes to Saturated, if you think about, the meaning of Saturated is, it's all over you. And you're night after night with these big powerhouses of these sermons, and you're on your knees every single night. And I think of the whole abiding, when you abide in Christ like that it just flows out. You can't keep it in, and it's this building abiding that just accumulates, and at the end of the whole Saturated, it is, you're on fire. And you were day one, right? So then toward the end, you're just it's just abiding in Jesus in such a worshiping, powerful way that I don't know, it comes out.
Oh gosh, and then Sunday when Joby's closing it out, and you've got the baptismals right there, and it's just baptism after baptism after baptism. And I was at the first service, I guess, on Sunday. And the service was over and the lines were still full of people that were going to get baptized. And I was just like, what? The floors are soaking wet. And it's just person after person. And then, as is fairly typical, I guess, there's the people that plan to get baptized that day. And then there's the people that day in that service had given their life to Christ. And so they're just getting in line, and volunteers are trying to find them a t-shirt to get baptized in. And, they didn't come with a bathing suit and a change of clothes. Like, these are people in their church clothes that are like, let's just go. Let's get in the water. So anyway, I should stop like slobbering all over the church, because I think, obviously I'm a huge fan of what Joby's built. And, I'm just thrilled that I feel like I'm a small part of it, and I get to be a part of kind of, Saturated and Encounter and Beach Baptism and the men's conference, and that I can kind of be ingratiated into the Church 1122 family, even though I live in the middle of nowhere in Oklahoma. But another good thing about the church is there is a missional focus, but not everyone, I guess, is called to missions, if you will. That's kind of like a church phraseology thing. But you and your husband did have a calling on your heart and on your lives that kind of pushed you towards the world of missions. And so let's just start there with kind of those initial, promptings of the Holy Spirit for you and Gary that, hey, there's something that y'all are needed to do, and there's work that needs to be done, and not just in Duval County?
Yeah. Well, as a little girl, I used to watch television, and they would have infomercials of Save the Children for 50 cents a day. You could help the starving child in Africa, and it would, show all the children laying around, pretty much starving to death, and it hurt me. Like, it just hurt my heart, and I was like, I'm not going to have kids. I'm going to go adopt all those children, and I thought I could drive there. I didn't know Africa was in another country. I didn't know I couldn't drive my car, but that was just embedded in me at that point in time. And then I was going to become a nurse and do all these things to get to Africa one day. I was going to join the Peace Corps. I was trying to figure out, how do you do that? Because now mission trips are just so common. Every church has a mission platform, but at that time they didn't. Beach didn't really, when we were going to Beach Church, they didn't have one. They had missionaries at that time. Like, a lot of churches had planted missionaries, but not short-term mission trips. My husband and I, when we got married, I shared that dream with him, that something that I had always wanted to do was to go, save the world, so to speak. And it just, I knew I was supposed to be somewhere. And he too had, kind of thoughts growing up that that's what he wanted to do in a different kind of form. But we started Googling, Google didn't exist at the time. So we started looking up, like, how do you go on mission trips? Because I didn't know, do you have to go to a mission school and become a missionary? And do I have to memorize Bible verses, or like, how does this work? And we were invited to come along on United Methodist Volunteers in Mission. And they said, yeah, join a team. If there's an opening, you guys can join. And we figured that I think it was like July would be a good month, because our daughter was out of school. So she could go visit her grandmother. And we ended up going to Panama on a trip with United Methodist Volunteers in Mission. And they let us go, didn't have to do any kind of studies or anything. We just joined a team, and I was a nurse and my husband was a doctor, and we ran a medical clinic. And that was our first one. And that was in, I think, 1998. And then started just going, every year trying to hit a different country. We went back to Panama a couple of years, but then hit a new country and kind of just fell in love with it. Adopted a child from Guatemala. We already had 3 biological kids of our own, but we just wanted that passion to serve. And then eventually God just kept calling, that orphanage, Julie, that orphanage, you got to save those children. And we ended up starting our orphanage in Panama. And that was probably in 2007 is when we bought the land in Panama. But we started running some mission teams and building stuff in 2009. And then running teams, people just wanted to come with us. It was not built. We weren't doing it to be a mission trip organization. We were doing it to be just to build an orphanage, but people wanted to come along with us. So it kind of grew into like a mission center.
Okay, well, let's go back just a little bit, because plenty of people have been on a mission trip. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they've gone on a trip to wherever, and they're just there for a week, and they're helping people, they're building houses, they're digging water wells, they're sharing the gospel, they're doing that kind of stuff, and then they just kind of go back to their normal life. And then you have more long-term missionaries, so maybe they are living in one of these places for a year or two or even longer, and they're kind of ingratiating themselves into the culture of that area. And then there's kind of what y'all did, which is somewhat hybrid, to where you're still living in Florida, but you're running this thing now. I stepped on my own question. You went to Panama once, and that could have been it, Julie.
Yeah. That
could have been it. Y'all did the good work. You were the hands and the feet of the gospel, and, you did good work. I guess why? Why? I was watching y'all's videos on y'all's website, and I want y'all to, talk about that. My wife's just hearing the video, and she's getting upset. She's like, oh my gosh, I want to go save all the babies, right? And, she just kind of has that because of her feminine energy, being a mother, all the things, right? Some of the same things that you said that you felt. But there's so many opportunities to do stuff that's like that, but it's different to dedicate your time, energy, and resources and money to actually doing it long term. So where did that shift come from? No, I didn't just go to a trip and do a thing one time, but this is just what I'm going to do now.
I think I just, it was something that was in me for so long to do, like that passion to go help kids, like how your wife heard the video and got moved and had that moving moment. I had that moving moment from a child. And then when I finally got to go and do what I had been dreaming of doing my entire life, there was no way I was not going back. Like, it was just, I think, a God-given heart and love and desire for that. And not everybody's called to that. And some people are called to be, maybe in your point in time, like just the mother or the father, for your child. And some are called to do missions here in the United States. And I've had critics as well ask me, why aren't you helping people in the United States? Why aren't you using your money, to help people? There's poor people here. And I'm like, absolutely, there's poor people here. But, apparently, God has called you in your heart to help people here. And he doesn't call everybody to the same place. Could you imagine if we're all standing around in Panama trying to help Panama?
Right.
And that's just where he put me. And I just feel like we've just gone back to where God has called us to go. And there was an unsettling and unrest until we went back there. And he kept calling us back and back and back. And that's kind of when we're like, okay, I think we're supposed to be actually setting up a nonprofit here. Because we were just going and serving short term, but there was just something missing. We needed that continuation of being the hands and feet of Christ in that area to be able to share the love of Christ with those people.
Okay, I want to get into more specifics about the nonprofit here in a second, but back in a past life, I was doing a lot of consulting work for different tech companies and sales and management and marketing type consulting. And I worked for this group that did technology for veterinarians. Mm-hmm. And this was the first time I had heard the phrase empathy fatigue. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what's that? They're like, well, the suicide rates for veterinarians are higher than just about any other profession, right? They're in the top tier. Mm. And I'm like, why would that be? And they're like, because every single day you're having to empathize with an animal that can't tell you where it hurts, right? And they're constantly having to put animals down. They're dealing with the emotions of the owners that are losing, their best friend and all the things, right? And they see, it's so sad to think about, but they see these dogs or cats or whatever that are in massive amounts of pain, and they administer a little vial of medicine, and all of a sudden that animal's no longer in pain anymore. And here they are getting this, fatigue and the crazy hours and people demanding that they work on Saturdays to help their dog and all that type of stuff. And then finally one day they want the relief for themselves, and they take that way out. I am not, you're probably gonna be shocked by this, I'm not a naturally compassionate person, right? Like I'm kind of a knuckle dragger in a lot of ways. And so I have to kind of stop myself to remember, sympathy and empathy, like those are emotions I should be able to feel. And like, it's okay to have compassion. But when I heard about what you were doing in Panama, my first thought was, okay, well, there's poor people in America. There's poor people in Sri Lanka. There's destitute people in Congo. Like there's problems everywhere. Like, it's impossible to fix all these problems. And so not like, hey, we should just throw our hands up and not do anything. But I'm like, how do you point to your empathy in a direction, Julie? Do you just kind of let the Holy Spirit guide you and say, yes, I know that there are people that are in bad situations other places, but that's not your race, Julie and Gary Proctor. That's someone else's race. That's something that I've got for somebody else to do. I need you in Panama. Like, just help me understand, because again, I feel like a Neanderthal sometimes where I'm just like, why are these people being so emotional? But just kind of help me, counsel me in this moment, Julie.
Wow, that's tough, because you're absolutely right. There's, and you just have to go. You go where God is calling you to go. Like you won't feel at ease or settled with yourself if you're not doing what He's called you to do. Now, we also serve and do work here in the United States, not through our organization, but when there's needs, different organizations, we try to help as well. Like, it's not exclusively to Panama, but that's hard. It's just a calling. It's where God's leading you to go. And, I have empathy and, you talk about the empathy for the hurting, but it's not even just that sadness for them. And they can't say, sometimes they bite back, and so you've got to have that ability to have compassion and understanding in all circumstances. And, people burn out with that, because you don't get a lot of gratitude from a teenage girl who's been abused, and, you don't get like good vibes from her all the time. Like she a lot of times wants to run away. Why do you have me here? And this is jail, and there's that that negative fighting. But then the beauty comes from when she sees the beauty within her, and eventually it's good time. So the answer is you just gotta step in faith, pray that God keeps directing you, and I'm not limited to one country, and I don't even know that I would always stay in Panama. If it can get up and running and, God leads me to another country, I may eventually get to Africa, which was my original dream.
Okay, so let's talk about the nonprofit. So what's the name of it? What's kind of the mission? What's the focus? Let's go from the beginning. Let's work our way to today.
Okay, it's called Hands of Faith, but in Spanish. So it's Manos De Fe, Hands of Faith. And we are a home for young girls who have been abandoned, abused, human trafficked. And they come to us after they are rescued from a rescuing organization, then put into the governmental kind of like Department of Children's Services. Then they will get placed with us. And we are a safe, transformative home that's kind of protecting the children and has psychologists, has house moms, has everything to keep. It's multi-focus. It's hard to put it into words, but we are a safe home for young girls who've been human trafficked, who have children as a result of their abuse.
Okay, and so in terms of the programs, I think I remember from your website you do, so there's family outreach, there's education, and then there's orphan transition.
Correct.
And so if we can maybe spend a little bit of time on each one of those, like how are these women identified? Are y'all in the process of getting them out of the trafficking situation, or this is just you found them afterwards? So give us a little bit more detail there.
So we get the girls in our orphan, the orphan care program is girls who have been rescued. So their Operation Underground Railroad works in Panama, and also their government has a task force as well. And they will go rescue the girls or rescue the boys. There's the little boys as well that get rescued, and then they get put into our custody until they're doing the research to see where there's a safe family. So they try to put them back into a functioning, safe family, which is actually the best for the kids. And then we also have girls who have transitioned out of your standard orphanage where they're young and have no skills for the future. So at 18, you have to leave an orphanage. Or even if you're 14 and have a baby, or 15 and have a baby, they would separate the baby and put them in a baby orphanage, and the girls go in a young girls orphanage. But we are an orphanage or a home where we would allow them to stay together. So ours is like a different kind of orphanage of any of the other orphanages in Panama, in the fact that we allow mothers to stay with children and teaching them how to be mothers to their kids. And then we have we realize that when they come in that they have not been educated. Some of them come off the indigenous reservation where the girls in particular aren't allowed to go to school, or it's not found to be important to go to school. So we try to get them education to at least be able to read and write. And if they can succeed beyond that, then we've had girls to go to college even. So we push them in their educational pursuits and find out, what it is that they want to do when they get older. And they're welcome to stay with us as long as they need to be able to launch on their own. Go ahead.
No, I was just, actually go ahead. I think you're going to hit on what I was going to ask.
Okay. Well, and then we also have our family outreach program, which is a little bit of an orphan prevention program. We found young moms and sometimes grandparents that have been given the custody of their children, of their grandchildren, because their children have issues or problems that they're not able to parent. So we help them be able to keep their children, together in their family unit by offering food in their family outreach program once a month from our pastor, and clothing and school uniforms or whatever it takes, medications to be able to keep that family intact. So that's our family outreach program. Okay.
One question that came up, there was a book that came out years ago, When Helping Hurts, and there have been a lot of pieces, obviously you sound like you're familiar with that. There is a line that's not, you can't put a line on an entire culture or an entire group of people or anything like that, but there's a line with each individual person where once you help them beyond this point, you're actually doing harm to them, because it's kind of like with, people that take care of elderly patients. It's like whatever they're capable of doing, you have to let them do it. You can't do it for them. And it's the same with small children. You're taking away developmental ability and cognitive ability and things like that when you just do everything for them. Is there some sort of a governor, I guess, you have in your ministry to where it's like, okay, this particular woman or this particular whatever situation, this is where we have to say, okay, you got to stand on your own 2 feet now. Like, we've helped you. We've gotten you out of this horrific situation that you couldn't have gotten yourself out of even if you wanted to. But now you got to stand on your own 2 feet. You got to do your own thing. Like, you got to be an adult now. Like, you got to perform. Is there something in there that kind of, I guess solves for that?
Yeah, well, for sure. And that's, we're very picky about that. And we're very strict on that, because we feel like that when you do something for someone who can do it for themselves, or when you give them something that they could actually work for themselves, you're pretty much telling them that they're worthless, or they're not able to do, like, let me do it for you because I'm so much better than you. So we have families that leave the program once they get some of our families have just no employment options at the time. They're indigenous, they're migrant farm workers. The farming season has ended. They just need a little help for a little while they're waiting for the next crop to come in. And so they would leave the program, and we make it an honoring thing too when you get to leave the program and you get to suggest a family maybe that that could potentially need some help. So it's an honorable thing to not be needing our assistance anymore. And then also we try to, if there's employment options that we can find for them, or even coming to work for us, we do that. Nothing's really given away. Everybody has something that they can give, whether it's community serve dates, it's coming to work at the church and help the pastor with things, or some of the elderly ladies just get prayer lists of people they can be praying for. But everybody has something that they can contribute that is of worth.
All right. And there's something else that I hear about in these different communities where you're doing the work that you're doing. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but if fathers were doing their duties as fathers and husbands were doing their duties as husbands, there wouldn't be any need for y'all to be doing what you're doing in Panama, right? But we don't live in this fanciful, parallel universe. We live in a post-Genesis 3 world that's been broken by sin, and you have a bunch of men that are perfectly okay with siring children but not fathering them. You have men that are perfectly okay with taking advantage of sexuality and taking advantage of sex and the entire reproductive process, but not wanting to stick around afterwards. They want the pleasure, but without the responsibility. And so is there anything that you guys are doing as an organization to, I guess, show these women, similar to what I was talking about earlier with the woman that I met at Church of 1122, where you're showing them like, hey, here are some positive masculine influences in your own community? Because it's one thing if I show up to an orphanage and the kids for a week can look at me as like a masculine role model or something like that, but I don't live there. It's the same thing when I go speak places. I speak at other churches. I was like, guys, I'm here to burn it down and walk away. I don't live in who's it's what's in Indiana. Yeah. Like I live here. Like I don't live here. I live somewhere else. Y'all have to deal with this whenever I leave. So how do y'all kind of make sure they're not just getting feminine energy or just energy from Westerners that show up, periodically to make sure that everything's still working right?
Yeah. Well, don't discredit yourself being Westerner, because I think a lot of the mission teams that do come, the male influence is huge, because they get to see something that traditionally and culturally they don't get to see, which is a man having pride and love for their child, like putting your child on your shoulders and running around. That's not something they do. They don't play with their kids like that. It's a very hard culture, the indigenous culture in particular. But so they do get a lot from the mission teams that come, especially the men. But also we have a church. We are a 1122 church plant site. So we have church, 24/7 church is the name of the church in Panama. And our girls are leaders in the church. They sing in the church. One of the girls teaches the Sunday school class. Another girl plays the keyboard there. But they are active in the church and seeing good, godly men coming in. And our pastor in particular is a spiritual kind of leader or head for them. He does Bible lessons and then memory verse lessons with them a couple of days a week. But then he goes out and lets our girls like help direct a lot of the programs in the church and things. So we intentionally trying to give them leadership positions. So they do get that in the church, but it's hard. Like it's the area that we're in, there's not a lot of, young boys or young activities to do with young boys with our girls. It's a very farming kind of rural town, but that is a good point. I should try to think more about, kind of how to incorporate that.
Well, I've got some ideas we can talk about off air, because one thing when you start stepping over cultures, it's not as simple as, clearing a field and putting in a couple of soccer goals, or it's not. It's not even getting them a book to read or something like that. It is a cultural level thing that comes down to a sin nature, that if you embrace the sin side of your nature, you won't do the things that would lead to, flourishing. Because, I've been put on this planet to equip men to push back darkness. And when you do that, you take dominion and you provide for human flourishing. Like, your job is to provide for human flourishing primarily for your bride, right? Yeah. Who lives in your household, and your progeny who live in your household. And then it's an outworking from there, right? That is home base. Mm-hmm. And you battle the rest of the darkness in the world from home base. But if you don't have any of that set up, or if it's kind of all out of whack, good luck. But I guess a question I have for you, and this isn't meant to be voyeuristic in any way. It's just I do ping more towards the darker side of things, because anytime you look at a website like y'all's website, or an organization that does something similar to that, there's a lot of emotion tied to it. And, obviously you're raising money because ministry is expensive, and people need to stop getting, their hackles up whenever ministries ask for money, because you don't perform ministries with, and pay for it with hopes and dreams. You pay for it with, money. And right, if you don't have money to do the things, then you can't do the things. But for you and Gary specifically, what's the hardest part of running this? Like, whenever you're not there, whenever there's no cameras around, and whenever you're not, working in the business, and y'all are just sitting there at the end of the night, right? What's the, gosh, this is just such a heavy burden to carry.
Wow, that's a good question. It's time consuming on my end. I'm the one who runs a lot of the teams, so there's a little separation of me with my biological family here in the United States. I'm gone a lot. I usually go on teams with about 11, 12 times a year. But I think the biggest, darkest, heaviest thing is like, what if we're not able to fund it for, in 6 months? Like, what if the funding goes away, and then what happens to these girls? And also, it's just the darkness of, like you said, there is so much evil in this world, and our girls have been through like some of the most horrendous things that were done by the men that were supposed to protect them. We're talking right. Fathers and stepfathers are the number one culprit of the girls that we have at Manos De Fe, and that would do things to them that they're supposed to protect and love them. So that heaviness and dealing with that, and then figuring out, but that's heavy. But then it's also fueling, because that has led us now into doing a lot of education in the community, especially in the indigenous reservation, with the gender-based violence, and that's another way our girls are learning, is they're hearing this, and they're hearing about how traditionally in that culture that women don't go to school, and that women don't have an opinion, and women aren't allowed to do certain things, and women can be given away in marriage or traded by their father for or lost in a poker hand. Like they don't have any say or anything with it. Now that is human trafficking, when a girl is sold or when a girl is given away. And then for them to hear that that's not right and that's not normal, and that's not the way that the Bible says that you're supposed to treat a woman. And so they're hearing good biblical sound doctrine of how a man should treat a woman. So it's hard to hear the stories, and it's hard, heavy burden to sort through, but it's also fuel to change.
Well, Julie, just let me take a second to, I guess, steel your nerves, STEEL, your nerves, and that of Gary's as well, because, some of the emails I get and some of the DMs I get and some of the stories that I have to spend time in, and the atrocities and the darkness that I expose myself to so that I can help equip other men, it's substantial. And people don't really think about that. We always look at the things on the back end. But if you're going to push back darkness, you're putting yourselves on the front lines. When you become an elder of a church, you are exposing yourself to the front lines of spiritual warfare. The guys in my Dominion coaching program, I tell these guys, the moment you sign up for this is spiritually like you're getting off of the couch. So Satan and, all the dark spiritual forces that we can't see, they haven't had to do anything with you. And now you're getting in the game. Now it's like, oh, shoot, I guess we need to kind of step our game up a little bit. And so I guess this is me just telling you how much I appreciate you all still moving forward, even though you have this internal consternation, even though dealing with the dark things is no fun, but this is what you're called to do. And if you are actually reading the Bible, you don't get this idea that once you become a Christian, everything is flowers and rainbows. It's exactly the opposite. Like, all of the apostles, except for John, who they tried to boil alive and they just couldn't kill the dude, all of them suffered horrible deaths, skinned alive, sawed in half, crucified upside down, like all these horrible things. You don't get this guarantee of a nice, easy life. But the guys in my audience, they're very action-oriented guys, right? And, they're oriented by, emotions of anger and injustice, and we've got to figure this out. But obviously most guys aren't just going to, gather up all their materials and go to Panama and start working on things, right? So for people in my audience that want to help y'all with the work that you're doing, just kind of tell them tangibly, what are the best and easiest ways to get involved in that work?
If you did want to come to Panama, that would be the best thing, because I would love to show you our girls and show you how happy they are. And then you would not know their history based on how awesome they're doing right now, and the kids, their children growing up in a loving, nurturing home, that breaking that cycle of abuse, within their family. But secondly, if you can go on our website, manosdefe.org. There are ways to financially contribute, because we're growing our relationship with the government, who through the years it's been difficult. Like, you can't just go into a country and start doing things. Like, you have to earn trust, and it's taken years to earn that trust and years to earn the government's approval. And it went from them thinking that we were opening a center to train warriors, for army or something. Is what they originally thought. And then they thought that we had our orphanage right by the border because we were going to traffic young girls across the border. I'm like, no, we're actually the opposite of what you're wanting. And it took many years to earn their respect. So now we sit on the country of Panama's, I think it's called I forgot. So the Children's Protective Services has a board, and they ask of all orphanages, they ask Manos De Fe to sit on the board. And we're working with their army to onboard a human trafficking task force of young ladies who are going to be the front line of the rescue and the trauma. So it's just, the need is that we get calls all the time for more girls to come, but we need to hire more tias, or those are the house moms that stay with the girls. But it's just that ongoing ministry support is the important theme, because we are only limited by the funds that we get in. And that's the biggest thing. And prayers, because it is hard. It is hard to have to fight with these girls, and not me, the tias, the house moms, but in a loving way, and showing them that this, going back to your abuser, because trauma has so many layers, and they have that bond with their father or mother that they want to go back to, and that's their normal, and they're trying to learn their new normal, and it takes a lot. So it takes finances, it takes education, there's just a lot of that.
Okay, well, I really appreciate you going into all the detail on the work that you're doing. Guys, we will put that website here in the show notes so that you can check that out. But we've weaved in and out a lot of different areas, and I really appreciate all of your great answers. But that's all for me, Julie. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
I just, want to appreciate you guys out there. And I think, you being there and showing what godly men are all about, that is what breaks that cycle. And that's what breaks, if you think about human trafficking as a whole, it's just, it's fueled by pornography. And pornography is broken by men acting like men and learning what men, and making that the common church vernacular. Hey, we have support groups for men battling this. Like, don't make it taboo. Don't, make it like, we're here to help you, brother. And none of you guys talk about that, in the darkness and helping one another. So just keep doing what you're doing. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Manos De Fe. And there's just so much more to it. We were limited by time, but just keep doing what God's calling you to do, one step at a time and one direction at a time.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad there's warriors out there like you there on the front lines. Again, Julie, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Bye.
There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Julie Proctor. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So the link I've got for you today, I've got a link to the Manos De Fe website. And guys, just go there, check it out. If you want to become a donor to their ministry, like obviously Church of 1122 supports what they're doing, and they don't just give money to these organizations that end up having a bunch of pizza parties and they're flying all their, board members around the world first class. Like, that money is being spent to help these people that are on the ground there in Panama. And so you guys can check that out. It's all there in the show notes. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.